Welcome to Woo English, where language comes alive. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary life of Frida Kahlo, a journey filled with passion, pain, and art that changed the world. You'll learn English as we explore Frida's remarkable story, her triumphs, her struggles, and how she became an icon of strength and creativity. Listen closely and let the story unfold, word by word, sentence by sentence. Ready? Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Blue House, A World Begins. In the heart of Coyoacan, Mexico City, there stands a house, not just any house, but Casa Azul, the Blue House. Its walls, so blue they seem to hold the sky, surrounded by trees, flowers, and life. Inside those walls, a world was waiting to be born. A world of dreams, of colors, of pain. It was here, in 1907, that little Frida Kahlo opened her eyes to the world. The house was filled with music, laughter, the sounds of Mexican tradition. But even in her early years, Frida could sense that life was not always as bright as the walls that surrounded her. There was something hidden, waiting to show itself. Frida was a spirited child, full of energy and curiosity. She loved to play, to run, to explore the garden of her home with her sisters. She had big dreams, of school, of learning, of becoming someone great. But when she was just 6 years old, those dreams began to change. Forever. It started with a fever, small at first, but then it grew. Her parents thought it was just a cold, but soon the fever turned into something else, something much worse. Polio. It swept through her young body, leaving her bedridden, weak, and scared. Her right leg, became twisted and thin, as though it was shrinking before her eyes. The illness dragged on for months, each day longer than the last, until one morning she couldn't walk. Can you imagine? A child so full of life, now trapped in a body that betrayed her? What could she do? Her world was the Blue House now. The house that seemed so full of light now felt like a prison. Children in the neighborhood whispered when they saw her, "Look! There's the girl with the limp." Frida was alone, or so it felt. But something happened in those moments of pain, of isolation. Something was stirring inside her. The sadness, the frustration, it all began to build into something else. If I cannot run, Frida thought, then I will fight. I will not be silent. From her bed, she began to dream of colors, of pictures, of things that no one else could see. And soon, those dreams would become real. But for now, her battle was only beginning. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, a photographer, watched his daughter struggle. He knew her pain, for he too had suffered from illness. But he also knew that pain could teach lessons, important lessons. He didn't coddle Frida. Instead, he encouraged her to push through her suffering. "Frida, mija," he would say, "you are strong, stronger than this. You will walk again, I know it." His words, though kind, were sharp, pushing her to find her own strength. And she did, slowly, painfully. Frida fought back. She started to walk again. But it wasn't the same. Her leg was still weak, and her limp would stay with her for the rest of her life. But the real change was not in her body. It was in her mind. The illness had planted a seed of resilience, of defiance. She would not let the world see her as weak. Her mother, Matilda, was more traditional, more protective. She wanted Frida to stay home, safe from the stares of others. But Frida was too stubborn for that. She had to return to school to feel normal again. And when she did, she wore long skirts to cover her leg, never letting anyone see her pain. She learned to hide it, to bury it deep inside. But it never left her. As the years passed, Frida became more than just the girl with the limp. She was clever, curious, rebellious. She joined a group of politically active students where she began to challenge the world around her. She questioned everything: authority, tradition, even her own identity. Her body might have been broken, but her spirit was unstoppable. Yet, every now and then, in the quiet of the night, when the world had gone to sleep, Frida would feel it, the ache in her leg, the weight of loneliness pressing down on her chest. And in those moments, she would remember the feeling of being trapped in her bed, unable to move, the fear that she would never be free of her broken body. But Frida had learned something from those early days, something important. She learned that life was full of pain, yes, but it was also full of possibility. And she would not be defined by her suffering. She would rise above it. She would find a way to transform it into something beautiful, something that the world had never seen before. And so, in the quiet of her childhood, within the blue walls of her home, Frida Kahlo began to see the world differently, not as a place of safety, but as a place of challenge, a place where she would have to fight for everything she wanted. But fight she would. The seed of her future had been planted. The pain of polio, the isolation, the whispers behind her back, these would all become the roots of her story. A story of a girl who learned to defy her limitations, a girl who would one day turn her pain into art that would captivate the world. In the Blue House, a world had begun, but it was only the beginning. Chapter 2. Shattered Dreams, a Broken Body. Frida Kahlo was just 18 years old, full of hope, full of life. She had fought so hard to overcome her childhood illness, and she had. Her limp was still there, but her spirit had grown stronger, fiercer. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, of healing others. She wanted to give the world more than just her pain. And so she studied, she worked hard, her mind sharp and her ambitions high. But fate had other plans for Frida. It was a normal day, just like any other. Frida and her boyfriend Alejandro had decided to catch a bus home after school. The sun was shining, the streets of Mexico City were alive with noise and color. Frida laughed, feeling young, feeling free. They climbed aboard the bus, but they had no idea what was about to happen. Suddenly a crash. The bus collided with a tram, metal against metal. Screams filled the air. In an instant, Frida's world shattered. The force of the impact sent her flying through the air. And then, darkness. When Frida opened her eyes, she was lying in the street, her body broken, twisted, bleeding. She could barely breathe. Her spine crushed. her pelvis shattered. An iron handrail had pierced through her abdomen, pinning her to the wreckage like a doll. She was drowning in pain. Her entire body felt like it was on fire, like every bone, every muscle was screaming. And yet, somehow, she was still conscious. Alejandro found her, his face pale with shock. He couldn't believe what he saw. Frida, the girl he loved, barely alive. She whispered, her voice weak, trembling, "Don't leave me." But there was nothing he could do. Strangers gathered around her, desperate to help, but no one knew if she would survive. They rushed her to the hospital, every moment feeling like a lifetime. Frida lay in the hospital bed, her body so still, her mind racing. The doctors didn't have much hope. She had broken her spinal column, her collarbone, her ribs. Her right leg was fractured in 11 places. 11. Her foot, crushed beyond repair. Her pelvis was shattered, her body left in pieces. "Will I ever walk again?" she asked. But no one had the courage to answer. The silence told her everything. Weeks turned into months. The doctors put her in a full-body cast, immobilized, trapped once again, just like she had been with polio. Only this time, it was worse. So much worse. She couldn't move, couldn't even turn her head without pain slicing through her. She was trapped in her own body, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. But Frida was not one to surrender. Even in the face of unbearable pain, she refused to give up. "If I can't move my body," she thought, "I'll move my mind." Her father had given her a gift, a mirror, and a small easel that attached to her bed. She couldn't get up, but she could paint. And so she began. With every brushstroke, she poured out her pain. She painted herself, her broken body, her haunted eyes. "I paint myself," she said, "because I am so often alone, because I am the subject I know best." She painted her suffering, her sadness, her frustration, but also her determination. The canvas became her voice, her way of telling the world, "I am still here." Her first self-portrait was a reflection of her soul. She painted herself in vivid colors, dressed in traditional Mexican clothes, her hair pulled back, her eyes looking straight ahead. But behind her calm expression, there was so much more. Her pain, her defiance, her refusal to be forgotten. The days were long, the nights even longer. She cried in silence when no one could see. The weight of her injuries crushed her spirit at times, but then she would reach for her brushes. She would dip them into color and paint a world that only she could see. A world where pain was transformed into beauty. "I'm not broken," she told herself. "I'm creating." But her recovery was slow, and every day felt like a battle. She had to learn to walk again, step by painful step. Her once strong body was now fragile, delicate. The pain was constant, sharp, a reminder of the accident that had changed everything. But through it all, Frida's spirit never faltered. She fought with everything she had, her passion for life burning brighter with each day, even as her body struggled to keep up. Her family was her lifeline during this time. Her mother, Mathilde, brought her comfort, while her father, Guillermo, encouraged her to keep going. But it was the painting, the art, that truly saved her. It gave her purpose, a way to release the anger, the sadness, the frustration that threatened to consume her. Art became her escape, her survival. Frida began painting more and more, her style evolving with every piece. She didn't just paint herself, she painted her pain, her dreams, her hopes. She painted what she couldn't say in words. And slowly, the world around her began to take notice. Her accident had stolen so much from her, her health, her dreams of becoming a doctor. But it had given her something else. It had given her a new path, one where her art, her passion, her story would be her greatest weapon. She realized in those quiet moments with a brush in her hand that she could transform her pain into something powerful, something that could touch others. But still, there were days when she questioned everything, when the weight of her broken body was too much to bear, when the pain was too sharp, too endless. Why? She would whisper to herself in the darkness. Why did this happen to me? But deep down, she knew. She knew that she had a gift to turn her suffering into something more, into art that would live on long after she was gone. And so, with every breath, every brushstroke, Frida Kahlo began her journey. A journey that would take her through unimaginable pain, but also to unimaginable heights. Chapter 3. Diego, the man, the muse. Frida had begun to rebuild herself, piece by painful piece. Her body was still fragile, her spirit scarred, but her art was growing, her passion, her fire. And then he entered her life. Diego Rivera. Diego was already a giant in the world of Mexican art. His murals told the story of Mexico, of revolution, of struggle. He was powerful, larger than life, a man whose presence filled every room he walked into. Frida had known of him for years, had admired his work from afar. But when she finally met him, everything changed. It was in 1928, at one of Diego's mural projects. Frida, bold as always, brought her paintings to him. She was determined. "I need your opinion, Diego," she said, her eyes flashing with that familiar fire. Diego looked at her with curiosity, not yet realizing who this woman was or what she would become in his life. He examined her work carefully, then paused. "This," he said softly, "this is incredible." Frida's heart raced. Diego Rivera, the Diego Rivera, was impressed by her art? It was as if a door had opened, a path she had never imagined. But this was not just about admiration. No, something much deeper stirred between them. Diego was mesmerized by Frida. Her strength, her wit, her sharp tongue that could slice through any conversation. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. And Frida. She saw in Diego a man of passion, a man who saw the world in big, bold strokes, just like she did. Their connection was instant, electric. It wasn't just love at first sight. It was like two forces colliding, an explosion of emotion that neither could control. Their relationship was intense, wild, unpredictable. Diego was 20 years older, already established, while Frida was just beginning to rise. But to her, age didn't matter. Status didn't matter. She was drawn to Diego like a moth to a flame. And she knew it could burn her. "He is not faithful," people warned her. "He will break your heart." But Frida didn't care. She wanted him, wanted the fire, the passion, the madness. And so, in 1929, they married. Frida, with her bright red lips and bold personality, standing beside Diego, the giant of Mexican art. But their marriage was not a quiet, peaceful one. No, it was a storm. Diego loved Frida, but he could not be faithful. His affairs were numerous, each one more painful than the last. Frida, too, had her own lovers. Men, women. Their love was as complicated as it was passionate. But through it all, Frida never stopped loving him. "Diego is my everything," she would say. "My child, my lover, my muse." She saw his flaws, his betrayals, but her heart belonged to him. And Diego loved her fiercely, but he was not the kind of man who could belong to just one woman. His love was as big as his art, boundless, impossible to contain. Their fights were legendary, their arguments loud, dramatic, filled with anger and passion. But just as quickly as they fought, they would make up, their love always pulling them back together. It was like a dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes destructive, but always filled with energy. "We are like two volcanoes," Frida once said, "both of us spewing lava, but neither of us can cool down." And yet, in the midst of all this chaos, there was something beautiful. Diego became Frida's greatest supporter, her biggest fan. He saw the brilliance in her art, the raw emotion that poured from every painting. "You're better than me," he once told her, and Frida knew he meant it. Diego pushed her to keep creating, to keep pushing the boundaries of her work. Together, they traveled the world, their love story unfolding against the backdrop of the art they both loved so much. But it wasn't always easy for Frida. Diego's betrayals, they cut deep, especially the affair with her own sister, Christina. That wound almost destroyed her. Frida was devastated, her heart shattered into pieces. She couldn't believe it. Her own sister. How could Diego do this to her? The pain was unbearable, a betrayal that seemed too deep to forgive. For a time, they separated. Frida couldn't bear the sight of him, the memory of the hurt. But even in her anger, her sorrow, she couldn't fully let him go. Diego was like a part of her soul, a part she couldn't sever, no matter how much he hurt her. She turned to her art again, painting her heartbreak, her anger, her disappointment. Her self-portraits from this time were darker, more intense. They spoke of a woman trying to heal, but the scars, they were deep. Eventually, they found their way back to each other. They remarried in 1940, but the relationship had changed. Frida had changed. She was no longer the young girl who idolized Diego. She had become her own force, her own voice. Her art had grown more powerful, more personal. She no longer needed Diego to define her. She had found her own identity, and it was stronger than ever. Diego still loved her, but he had to accept that Frida was no longer just his muse. She was an artist in her own right, an icon. Their love endured, but it was different now, less fiery, more resigned, as though they had both come to understand that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. Frida's relationship with Diego shaped so much of her art, the passion, the pain, the heartbreak. But it also gave her strength. "I have suffered 2 great accidents in my life," she once said. One was the bus, the other was Diego. Diego was by far the worst. But even with all the heartache, Frida knew that Diego had helped her become who she was. Their love, though painful, had given birth to some of her greatest works, works that would go on to inspire the world. Frida Kahlo's heart may have been broken many times, but it never stopped beating with passion, with love, with art. And through it all, she continued to paint, continued to tell her story, her truth, on every canvas. Chapter 4. Brushstrokes of Suffering. Frida Kahlo sat in front of her easel, her brush trembling slightly in her hand. The canvas in front of her was blank, but in her mind, in her heart, there were already 1,000 images, 1,000 emotions, waiting to be released. The pain in her body had become unbearable, her health deteriorating with each passing day. But even as her bones ached, even as her spine felt like it was on fire, she painted. She had to paint. It was her only escape, her only way to scream without making a sound. Frida's art had always been personal, but now it became even more raw, even more intimate. She wasn't just painting self-portraits, she was painting her pain. Her brush moved across the canvas with a kind of urgency, as though every stroke was a release of the suffering that had taken root in her body. She painted her broken spine, her limp, her surgeries, her miscarriages, her soul. "I am not sick," she would say to herself, to anyone who would listen. "I am broken." And yet, in her brokenness, Frida found power. One of her most iconic paintings during this time was the Broken Column. In it, Frida stands tall, her body split open, her spine replaced by a crumbling stone column. Nails pierce her skin, her face wet with tears. But still she stands. Her expression is calm, almost defiant. She wanted the world to see, to feel what she felt. She wasn't just a woman in pain. She was a warrior, battling against her own body, against life itself. Frida didn't just paint for herself anymore. She painted for everyone who had ever suffered, for everyone who had ever felt trapped in their own skin, for those who had been broken by life, by love, by fate. She painted her struggle, her fight, but also her strength. Every time Frida picked up her brush, she transformed her suffering into something beautiful, something powerful. But it wasn't easy. There were days when the pain was too much, days when she couldn't even lift her arms to paint. Her body was failing her, betraying her. The doctors told her she needed more surgeries, endless surgeries that offered little relief. She had become a regular patient at the hospital, her body stitched together by doctors who couldn't understand the depths of her pain. The physical pain was unbearable, yes. But the emotional pain, the loneliness, the heartbreak, that was a different kind of suffering. It pierced her in ways that no surgery could heal. Still, she fought. Even when her body was weak, her spirit remained fierce. "I have to paint. I have to show the world what it means to live with pain," she whispered to herself, clutching her brushes like they were weapons. Because for Frida, they were. As her health declined, her art grew bolder, more unapologetic. She stopped trying to hide her pain. In Without Hope, She painted herself lying in bed, her body weak, surrounded by a chaotic mixture of food and animals force-fed into her mouth. It was a powerful metaphor for how she felt, forced to endure treatments that offered no real hope, no real relief. She was trapped once again in a body that refused to cooperate. But even in these moments of despair, Frida's art was not just about pain. It was about survival. It was about endurance. She painted herself as a woman who refused to be defeated, no matter how much her body tried to betray her. Feet. What do I need them for? If I have wings to fly, she once wrote, a testament to her indomitable spirit. Frida's suffering wasn't just physical. Her heart, too, had been shattered by Diego, by the loss of her children, by the constant betrayals that seemed to follow her. She had longed to be a mother, but her body would not allow it. The miscarriages, the operations, the hopelessness. It was as though the universe had decided to take everything from her. But in her paintings, she found a way to heal, if not her body, at least her heart. In Henry Ford Hospital, Frida paints herself lying naked on a hospital bed, blood pooling beneath her, 6 objects floating around her, each one representing her lost dreams of motherhood. The fetus, the snail, the mechanical pelvis, each one a symbol of the things she could never have. But in that painting, as in so many others, Frida faced her pain head on. She didn't shy away from it, didn't hide it. Instead, she laid it bare for the world to see. Her art became a kind of catharsis, a way to make sense of the suffering, of the chaos. With every painting, she peeled back another layer of her soul, revealing the deepest parts of herself to the world. And the world responded. People were drawn to her work, not just for its beauty, but for its truth, for its raw, unfiltered expression of what it meant to be human, what it meant to suffer, and to survive. As her fame grew, so did her pain. But Frida never let it stop her. Even when she was bedridden, she found a way to paint. Her passion was too strong, her desire to create too fierce. The doctors told her she couldn't. But Frida had never been one to listen to what others told her she couldn't do. And so she painted, and painted, and painted. Her body may have been failing, but her spirit was soaring. She transformed her suffering into art that would outlive her, that would inspire generations to come. Because for Frida Kahlo, art wasn't just a form of expression. It was a lifeline. As the years passed, the pain only grew, but so did her art, her legacy. Every brushstroke was a victory, every painting a testament to her strength, her defiance. And though her body would one day give out, her spirit would never die. Chapter 5. A love rekindled. But at what cost? Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. A love that was never simple, never easy. Their story was full of passion, yes, but also betrayal, pain, and fiery arguments that echoed through their lives. And yet, they could never fully let go of one another. By 1939, the cracks in their marriage had grown too deep. Frida could no longer stand Diego's infidelities, the lies, the affairs that shattered her heart again and again. And the worst betrayal of all, Diego's affair with Christina? Frida's own sister? Her heart broke that day, shattered into pieces. She wasn't sure she could ever put back together. She was furious, devastated. The pain was too much to bear. How could he? How could they? The divorce papers were signed. It was over, or so it seemed. Frida tried to move on. She tried to rebuild herself, focusing on her art, her life, her independence. She told herself she didn't need Diego, that she could survive without him. She surrounded herself with friends, lovers, and her beloved Mexico. But no matter what she did, Diego lingered in her heart, like a shadow she couldn't shake. As much as she hated him, as much as she cursed his name, she still loved him. Diego, too, felt the weight of their separation. Despite all his affairs, all his betrayals, he couldn't forget Frida. She was like no one else, her spirit, her fire, her soul. He missed her deeply. And so, in 1940, something unexpected happened. They came back together. "Remarry me," Diego pleaded. Frida, shocked, stared at him. Could she trust him again? Could she allow herself to open her heart to him once more, knowing the pain he had caused her? But Diego's love for her was real, despite everything. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else did. And Frida, though she was stronger now, more independent, she couldn't deny the love that still burned inside her. It wasn't just passion, it was something deeper, something unbreakable. And so, they remarried. But this time, it was different. Frida was not the same woman who had married him the first time. She had grown. She had suffered. She had survived. And now, she made it clear. She would not tolerate the old wounds. There would be no false illusions. Their love was different now. Matured, resigned, but still passionate. It wasn't the fiery storm it had been before, but it was a love that understood its flaws. They accepted each other, broken pieces and all. Frida knew Diego would never be faithful, and Diego knew Frida was no longer the young, naive woman she had once been. They both understood that love was not perfect, but it was real, and for them, that was enough. Still, their remarriage came at a cost. Frida's health was worsening. Her body, already weakened by the years of pain, was beginning to fail her even more. The surgeries, the treatments, nothing seemed to help. But Frida refused to let it stop her. She painted through the pain, through the endless days in bed. But Diego saw her slipping away. He watched as the woman he loved fought against a body that was crumbling. His heart ached, knowing there was nothing he could do. All he could offer was his love, his support. But he felt helpless, watching her suffer day after day. Frida, too, could feel her strength fading. But she was determined to keep painting, to keep creating. "I am not sick," she would say. "I am broken, but I can still create." Her art became even more powerful, even more intense, as though she was pouring every last bit of herself into her work. The colors grew bolder, the emotions rawer. She painted her pain, her heartache, her love for Diego. One painting in particular, Self-Portrait as a Tehuana, also known as Diego on My Mind, showed her devotion. In it, Frida is dressed in traditional Tehuana clothing, her face framed by flowers. But there, in the center of her forehead, is Diego's face. as if he is always with her, always a part of her thoughts, her soul. It was a testament to their complicated love, a love that had caused her so much pain, but also gave her so much strength. Yet with every stroke of the brush, Frida could feel her body breaking down. The pain was relentless, her spine deteriorating, her leg growing weaker. She had undergone so many surgeries, each one leaving her more fragile than the last. But she refused to be defeated. She wouldn't let her broken body stop her from living, from loving, from creating. Diego, always by her side now, watched with both admiration and sorrow. He couldn't help but feel responsible for some of her suffering, for the heartbreak he had caused her. But he also knew that Frida was stronger than anyone he had ever known. She faced her pain with courage, with dignity, with defiance. And so they continued. Their love, though quieter now, was still a constant in Frida's life. Diego became her rock, her anchor in the storm of her declining health. She leaned on him more than ever, and he stayed, loyal, devoted, in a way he had never been before. But Frida, she knew time was running out. Her body was failing her faster than she could paint her feelings. She often wondered if she would be able to finish all the art she wanted to create, if she would leave behind the legacy she so desperately wanted. And yet, despite it all, she kept painting, kept living, kept loving Diego. In the end, their love was not perfect. It was flawed, messy, full of mistakes, but it was real. And for Frida, that was enough. Her body might have been broken, but her spirit remained unbreakable. And Diego, the man who had caused her so much pain, was now the one who stood by her. Until the very end. Chapter 6. The world discovers Frida. Frida Kahlo, once a girl confined to her bed, broken by both illness and accident, was now on the verge of something remarkable. The world was beginning to notice her. But this recognition didn't come easily, nor did it come overnight. Frida had struggled, fought, and bled for her art. And finally, it was about to reach beyond the borders of Mexico. It started with a letter from André Breton, the French poet and founder of the Surrealist movement. He had seen her work and was captivated. "This woman doesn't just paint, she dreams on the canvas," he wrote. He called her a surrealist, though Frida disagreed. "I don't paint dreams," she would say. "I paint my own reality." And so, in 1939, she was invited to Paris to exhibit her work. It was her first step onto the world stage. And yet, Frida was nervous. She wasn't sure if they would understand her, if they could truly see what her paintings meant. But she packed her things, said goodbye to Diego, and boarded the ship. A new chapter was beginning. Paris was dazzling, full of artists, intellectuals, and excitement. Breton had promised her a grand exhibition, but when Frida arrived, she found chaos. The gallery wasn't ready. Her paintings were stuck in customs. And Frida, well, she was unimpressed. Paris may have been glamorous, but it was also exhausting. The people, the conversations, the surrealist circles, none of it felt real to her. They saw her art as some kind of fantasy, a game of the imagination. But for Frida, Her work was far from a game. It was her life, her pain, her soul. Yet, despite all the frustrations, something incredible happened. People began to fall in love with Frida's work. The exhibition, when it finally opened, was a sensation. People gathered around her paintings, mesmerized by the colors, the raw emotion, the story behind each stroke. They saw not just an artist, but a woman who had lived through unimaginable pain and transformed it into something extraordinary. Her self-portraits, particularly the two Fridas, became the talk of the art world. In this haunting piece, she painted two versions of herself, one dressed in traditional Mexican clothing, the other in a European-style dress. The two Fridas sat side by side, their hearts exposed, one heart bleeding, the other holding the picture of Diego. It was a symbol of her divided self, the Frida who loved Diego and the Frida who suffered because of him. Paris couldn't look away. Frida had captivated them. The surrealists adored her, but she remained skeptical. "I am not a surrealist," she would repeat. "I just paint what I feel." Yet, despite her resistance to labels, Frida was now an international sensation. Even the Louvre, the most prestigious museum in the world, bought one of her paintings, The Frame. She was the first Mexican artist to have a work displayed there. It was a triumph, a moment of validation. Frida Kahlo, the girl who had once thought her life would be spent as a doctor, was now an artist whose name would echo through history. But behind the scenes, Frida was struggling. Paris had been a whirlwind of success, but it had also been exhausting, overwhelming. The physical pain that never left her body was growing worse. The long hours, the travel, the expectations. It was taking its toll. She missed Mexico, missed the warmth of her home, the smell of the earth, the colors of the sky. Paris, with all its beauty, felt cold to her. And then there was Diego. Frida's heart still ached for him, despite everything. She had tried to move on, tried to distance herself from the hurt, but Diego was always there, in her thoughts, in her art. She painted him, even when she was far from him, his face appearing in her work, his presence haunting her canvas. In Paris, surrounded by admirers, Frida felt lonelier than ever. When the exhibition ended, she didn't linger. She packed her bags, leaving the glitz and glamour behind. The success was real, but it didn't fill the emptiness she felt inside. She needed to go home, to Mexico, to the place that had always been her refuge. Back in Mexico, Frida was welcomed like a hero. Her fame had grown, and now, even in her own country, she was being celebrated for her art. She was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She was Frida Kahlo, an artist in her own right. The world had discovered her. But Frida, she was still discovering herself. She returned to La Casa Azul, the blue house, her sanctuary, where the colors of her childhood still bloomed. But now everything was different. The world outside those blue walls had changed, and so had Frida. The pain in her body had become relentless, forcing her to spend more and more time in bed. But she didn't stop painting. No, never. She painted from her bed, brushes and paints spread across her blankets, determined to keep creating, to keep telling her story. With each passing day, the world came knocking at her door. More exhibitions, more requests, more admirers. Her art was being sold in galleries, shown in museums around the globe. People wanted to see the woman who had defied the odds, the woman who had turned suffering into art. But for Frida, the true victory wasn't in the fame, the money, or the recognition. It was in the fact that through it all, she had never lost herself. Her art had always been hers, personal, intimate. And now, as the world stood in awe of her, Frida continued to paint. Not for them, but for herself. Her body may have been broken, but her spirit was more alive than ever. The world had discovered her. But more importantly, Frida had discovered the power of her own voice, her own vision. And so, with every brushstroke, every painting, she showed the world what it meant to feel, to endure, to survive. Frida Kahlo was no longer just a name. She was a force that would live on long after her body could no longer hold her. Chapter 7. The Red Tears of Revolution. Frida Kahlo was not just a painter, she was a revolutionary. Her art wasn't the only place she poured her passion. No, Frida was a woman who burned with a fire for justice, for equality, for change. Her life, like her canvas, was a reflection of the struggles she saw around her: poverty, oppression, and injustice. And as her fame grew, so did her political voice. Frida was always deeply connected to the struggles of her country. Mexico, with its history of colonization, revolution, and rebellion, shaped her identity. She was proud of her roots, her indigenous heritage, and the rich culture that surrounded her. The colors, the people, the land, they were in her blood. And just as her art was filled with symbols of Mexico, so was her heart filled with a desire for change. Her politics were shaped early on. Even as a teenager, she had joined the Los Cachuchas, a group of rebellious students passionate about political change. But it wasn't just youthful energy. Frida's commitment to revolution was serious. As she grew older, she became a staunch communist, believing that the world could only be saved through the fight for equality. But the revolution wasn't just a distant dream for Frida. It was personal. She had seen the suffering of the people around her, had felt the weight of oppression in her own life. Her body, broken by illness and injury, had given her a deep understanding of pain. And this pain, this struggle, connected her to the fight for those who were suffering. Frida's home, La Casa Azul, became a meeting place for intellectuals, artists, and revolutionaries. The house echoed with discussions of politics, art, and the future. She welcomed those who fought for freedom. And among them was a figure whose presence would shake her world once more: Leon Trotsky. Trotsky, one of the key figures of the Russian Revolution, had been exiled from his homeland. Fleeing Stalin's wrath, he found refuge in Mexico, and it was Diego Rivera who offered him a place to stay. Frida, already deeply involved in the Communist Party, opened her home to him and his wife, Natalia. But it wasn't long before the connection between Frida and Trotsky became something more. Frida and Trotsky, an unlikely pair. He was older, serious, with the weight of revolution on his shoulders. She was vibrant, unpredictable, full of life, but the attraction between them was undeniable. They shared secret letters, stolen glances, quiet moments away from the chaos of politics. Their affair was brief but intense, a spark in the midst of a storm. But Frida, always restless, never let it consume her. "I am a daughter of the revolution," she would say, "and my loyalty is to the people, not to any man." As Trotsky moved on, both politically and personally, Frida remained focused on her art and her politics. Her paintings began to reflect not only her personal pain, but also the pain of the world around her. In Marxism, Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself in the arms of Karl Marx, holding her broken body, healing her wounds. It was a symbol of her belief that revolution, true revolution, could heal not only society, but the soul. Yet the revolution she believed in so deeply was not without its disappointments. The Communist Party, once a beacon of hope, began to fracture. Frida saw the corruption, the power struggles, the betrayals. Even her beloved Mexico, the country she had fought for, seemed to be slipping away from its revolutionary ideals. The promises of equality, of justice, felt distant, unreachable. And then there was her own personal revolution, the revolution inside her body. The pain, always present, always there, growing worse with every passing year. Frida's spine was deteriorating, her legs weakening, her body betraying her more and more. She had become a revolutionary in her own life, fighting against the pain, against the physical limitations that tried to stop her. But the battle was never ending. As her health declined, so did her involvement in politics. She no longer had the strength to march, to fight, to protest. But even from her bed, Frida's voice was loud. She wrote letters, attended meetings when she could, and continued to paint the world as she saw it. A world in desperate need of change. She was bedridden, but she was still a revolutionary, her mind as sharp as ever, her passion for justice burning bright. In her later years, Frida was often frustrated by the lack of progress. The world was still filled with suffering, with inequality, with pain. She watched as leaders failed their people, as revolutions fizzled out or were crushed by those in power. And yet, she never lost hope. "The fight is not over," she would say, "and as long as there is breath in my body, I will keep fighting." In 1954, just a few days before her death, Frida attended her last political rally. Weak, fragile, barely able to stand, she insisted on being there. It was a protest against American intervention in Guatemala. And Frida, always defiant, always proud, arrived in her wheelchair, wrapped in blankets, holding a banner that read, "Peace." She was tired, her body failing. But her spirit? Her spirit was as fierce as ever. Frida Kahlo was not just an artist. She was a voice, a symbol, a revolutionary. Her art told the story of her pain, but it also told the story of a world in need of change. A world she believed could be better, fairer, kinder. And though her body was broken, though her own revolution was incomplete, she knew that the fight would go on. Chapter 8. Living with Pain, Loving Through It. Frida Kahlo. Her body was failing piece by piece, but her heart was still fighting, still loving, still creating. By the 1950s, the pain had become a constant companion, a shadow that followed her everywhere. It gnawed at her bones, twisted her spine, and every step felt like fire coursing through her veins. Yet, in that torment, Frida refused to be defeated. She had been through surgeries, so many surgeries, each one promising relief that never truly came. Her leg, once her weakness from polio, had grown worse, leading to its amputation in 1953. When the doctors told her they had no choice but to take it, she had laughed through her tears. "Feet, what do I need them for?" she whispered. "If I have wings to fly?" But inside, she was devastated. Her body was slipping away from her, betraying her more and more each day. The world saw her as a symbol of strength, of resilience. But inside, Frida was battling the deepest darkness. She was trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her, yet her soul, oh, her soul was still ablaze. And in this time of agony, her love for Diego remained as fierce as ever. Complicated, yes, but powerful. Diego Rivera, the man who had broken her heart so many times, yet the man who stood by her when the world became too much. Their love was not perfect, never was, never could be. But it was real. Even as Frida's health worsened, Diego remained by her side, watching helplessly as the woman he adored faded. He had hurt her, yes, but now he was her rock, her anchor. Their home, La Casa Azul, became a refuge once again. The walls echoed with the sound of life, of art, of the love that bound them together. Diego would sit with her for hours as Frida lay in bed, surrounded by her paints, her brushes scattered around her. She couldn't stand, couldn't walk for long, but she could still create. "As long as I can paint," she said, "I am alive." And so she painted. Even in her darkest hours, even when the pain was so sharp, so all-consuming, she refused to let it silence her. Her work during this time was bold, raw, and emotional. Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair was one such piece, where Frida painted herself with short hair, dressed in a suit. It was a declaration. She was not just a body, not just a woman defined by her physical form or her pain. She was more. She was strength. She was defiance. But as the pain grew, so did her sorrow. Frida longed for the children she could never have, the dreams of motherhood that had been stolen from her by the accident, by the endless surgeries. She would cradle her belly sometimes, imagining what it would have been like to carry life within her, to feel the heartbeat of a child she would never hold. The ache of that loss never left her, and it spilled into her paintings. In Henry Ford Hospital, she painted herself lying on a hospital bed, connected by red cords to floating objects, symbols of her miscarriages, her dreams slipping away. Yet, through all this, she kept loving Diego, despite everything, loving Mexico, the country that had given her color, life, and identity, and loving herself in the only way she knew how, by telling her story, painting her pain for the world to see. Her fame had grown, spreading across continents. But for Frida, fame was never the goal. What she wanted was for people to feel, to see her art and understand the struggle, the beauty in suffering, the passion in pain. She once said, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Frida knew her time was running out. She felt it in every breath, every moment. But she wasn't afraid. If anything, she faced death with the same defiance she had lived with. In 1953, Mexico honored Frida with her first solo exhibition in her homeland. By then, she was too ill to walk, too weak to stand for long periods of time. But nothing, not the pain, not the endless surgeries, not even her body, could keep her from her own exhibition. She arrived in style, carried on a hospital bed, surrounded by friends, admirers, and those who had come to see the legend that Frida had become. She laughed, she sang, she joked, even as her body screamed in agony. It was a night of triumph, a night where the world saw Frida not just as a painter, but as a force of nature, someone who had taken her pain and transformed it into something magnificent. And though she lay in bed, surrounded by her work, she was more alive than ever. But soon, even her strength couldn't fight the inevitable. Her health continued to decline, and the pain became unbearable. Diego was always there, watching as she slipped away, powerless to stop it. He held her hand, kissed her forehead, and told her he loved her. For all their flaws, for all the heartache, Frida knew he meant it. She felt it. In her final days, Frida wrote in her diary, "I am happy to be leaving, and I hope never to return." She had lived her life fully, through love, through pain, through art, and now she was ready to let go. On July 13th, 1954, Frida Kahlo took her last breath. But her spirit, her art, her story, they lived on. Diego was devastated, his heart broken by the loss of the woman who had been his greatest love, his muse, his companion. He once said, "The day Frida died was the worst day of my life. And for the world, too, it was a great loss. But Frida's legacy, it could never be taken away." Chapter 9. The Art of Survival. Frida Kahlo's life was a masterpiece of survival. Each brushstroke, each color, each image on the canvas, a battle fought and won. Her body had betrayed her, time and time again, yet her spirit never bowed. It was this spirit that bled into her art, transforming her suffering into something eternal, something that spoke to the deepest parts of the human soul. By the early 1950s, her pain had reached its peak. Every movement was a struggle, every breath weighed down by the agony that tore through her body. But Frida was not one to surrender. She had survived so much: polio, the bus accident that shattered her spine, her miscarriages, Diego's betrayals. She had been broken, but she refused to be defeated. Her art became her weapon, her shield, her voice. With each painting, she showed the world not only her pain, but her defiance. She painted herself again and again, staring directly into the eyes of those who viewed her work as if daring them to look away. "I paint myself," she once said, "because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." And so she painted, her body wrapped in bandages, her spine pierced by nails, her heart exposed, yet her face always calm, always unflinching. In the broken column, she portrayed her body as fragile, but her gaze was one of quiet strength. The image was haunting, but it was also a declaration. "I may be broken, but I will never be silenced." Frida's health continued to worsen, and by 1953, she was bedridden most of the time. But even then, she refused to stop. From her bed, she created, her brushes resting on her sheets, colors mixing with the pain that filled every corner of her life. The world might have seen her as weak, but inside she was a volcano, erupting with passion, with creativity, with a fire that no amount of suffering could extinguish. Her love for Diego, too, had transformed. It was no longer the wild, uncontrollable storm of their early years. Instead, it had settled into something deeper, something stronger. They had hurt each other, yes, but in the end, they were bound together in a way that transcended their flaws. Diego became her rock in those final years, standing by her, watching over her as her health slipped away. But Frida was not a woman to be pitied. No, she would not allow that. "I am not sick," she told visitors who came to see her in those final months. "I am broken." Yet, even in her brokenness, she was whole in a way that many could never understand. Her art had given her wings, wings that allowed her to soar above the pain, above the limits of her failing body. The amputation of her leg in 1953 had been a devastating blow. For Frida, losing her leg felt like losing a part of her identity, her freedom. She painted her prosthetic, adorned with butterflies and bright colors, as if trying to reclaim what had been taken from her. But the loss, it weighed on her. She couldn't dance, couldn't walk through the gardens of La Casa Azul like she once had. She was trapped once again by her body. And yet, even then, she found ways to rise above it. In 1953, Mexico honored Frida with her first solo exhibition in her homeland. She was too ill to attend standing, too weak to walk, but she would not miss it. Carried into the gallery on her bed, Frida arrived with a smile, dressed in vibrant colors, flowers in her hair, as though she were the queen of her own kingdom. People crowded around her, in awe not only of her work, but of the woman who had defied every limit placed upon her. The exhibition was a triumph. Her paintings hung on the walls, each one a testament to her resilience, her passion, her survival. She laughed, she sang, she made jokes with the guests. Even as her body screamed with pain, she didn't let it show. Frida was a woman of life, of energy. That night, she was not just an artist. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of colors and emotion. But after the celebration, when the guests had gone, when the lights dimmed, Frida was left alone with her pain once more. She was tired, so very tired. The strength that had carried her through so many battles was fading, and she knew that her time was running out. Her final paintings took on a new intensity, a rawness that reflected her understanding of mortality. In Viva la Vida, she painted bright, vibrant watermelons, with the words "Long live life" written boldly across the fruit. It was her final message to the world, a celebration of life, even in the face of death. Frida had lived her life fully, every moment, every heartbreak, every triumph, and now she was ready to let go. By the summer of 1954, her health had deteriorated beyond repair. Her days were filled with pain, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had done what she came to do. She had told her story, and in doing so, she had given voice to all who suffered in silence. In her diary, she wrote, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." On July 13th, 1954, Frida Kahlo passed away. But death could not touch the legacy she left behind. Her art, Her life, her survival, these would live on, inspiring generations to come. Diego, heartbroken, would later say, "I realized too late that the most wonderful part of my life had been my love for Frida." But it wasn't too late for the world to see what she had left behind, a legacy of courage, of defiance, of passion. Frida Kahlo had turned her pain into something beautiful, something eternal. She had shown the world that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found. She was more than an artist. She was a survivor. And through her art, she would continue to live, her story echoing through the ages. Chapter 10. The Final Show. A Bed Among Flowers. The year was 1953. Frida Kahlo's body was weak, fragile, barely able to stand. The pain had become a constant rhythm, pulsing through her bones day and night. But despite everything, despite the endless surgeries, the amputation of her leg, the exhaustion that pulled her down like an anchor, Frida was determined. She had something left to prove, something she needed the world to see. Her first solo exhibition in Mexico, her country, her beloved homeland. It was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had fought through agony to reach. But the reality of it? She was too ill to walk, too weak to move. The doctors told her not to go. "You need to rest, Frida," they insisted. But Frida never listened to what her body told her she couldn't do. "Rest?" she had scoffed. "I'll rest when I'm dead." And so, the day came. The gallery was ready. The paintings hung on the walls, each one more vibrant, more haunting than the last. People gathered, excited, eager to see the work of the woman whose name had become legend. They whispered her name as they walked through the doors, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding. Frida Kahlo. What would she be like? Would she appear, or would her illness keep her away? Outside, a rumble of excitement, and then she arrived. Not standing, not walking, but lying on a bed, a hospital bed, draped in bright, colorful blankets. Flowers, the flowers she loved so dearly, were woven into her hair, blooming around her face like a crown. And despite the pain, despite the weakness that clung to her limbs, Frida smiled. It was a defiant smile, a smile that said, "I am still here." The crowd gasped. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Carried into her own exhibition on a bed, like a queen arriving at her coronation. Frida waved to them, laughing, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Even now, even in her most fragile state, she was full of life, full of fire. She was a woman who refused to let her body define her. Diego was there, of course, watching her from a distance, his heart heavy, torn between admiration and sorrow. He knew how much this meant to her, how much she had sacrificed to be there. And yet, he couldn't shake the sadness that gripped him. She was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Frida's bed was placed in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her art, her soul, painted in bright reds, deep blues, and haunting blacks. People gathered around her, amazed at the spectacle. And Frida, always the performer, always the storyteller, began to speak. Her voice was soft but strong, filled with the same passion she had poured into every brushstroke. "Do you like them?" she asked, nodding toward her paintings. "These are my children. each one born from my pain, my heart, my life. Her eyes flickered over the crowd, daring them to look away. I paint because I have no other choice. And the people, they couldn't help but fall in love with her all over again. Here she was, a woman who had faced unimaginable pain, who had fought through every obstacle, every heartbreak, and yet she was here, alive, laughing, daring the world to see her as more than just an artist confined to a bed. She was Frida Kahlo, a force of nature, a warrior in every sense of the word. One of the paintings that hung on the gallery walls that night was the broken column. In it, Frida had painted herself, her body split open, her spine replaced by a crumbling stone column, her flesh pierced by nails. It was a brutal, honest reflection of her suffering. But in her eyes, there was defiance. Even in the face of such pain, there was strength, a refusal to be defeated. The crowd moved from painting to painting, in awe of the emotion that radiated from each piece. In self-portrait, with thorn necklace and hummingbird, Frida's face was calm, surrounded by lush green leaves, a dead hummingbird hanging from her neck like a symbol of the battles she had fought. And still, her eyes stared forward, unblinking, as if to say, I will not be broken. As the night went on, Frida told stories, joked with her friends, and laughed in the face of her pain. She toasted with tequila, raising her glass to the future, even as she knew her own future was uncertain. It didn't matter. In that moment, surrounded by her art, by the people who had come to admire her, Frida Kahlo was triumphant. But as the night grew quieter, as the guests slowly began to leave, the weight of it all finally began to settle. The exhaustion, the pain. Frida's eyes grew heavy, her voice softer. She had given everything she had left to be there, to show the world what she was capable of, even in her final days. Diego came to her side, his face etched with worry. He knew. He knew how much it had cost her. "Did you see them, Diego?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "They love my children." Diego smiled, but his heart ached. "Yes, Frida," he said softly, "they love them. They love you." Frida closed her eyes, her hand resting on his. She had done it. She had shown the world who she was, what she was capable of. And in that moment, even as her body screamed with pain, she felt a sense of peace. She had fought, and she had won. The exhibition, her final show, was a testament to her strength, her will, her undying spirit. It was a celebration of her life, her art, her love, her endless fight against the odds. And though her body would soon fail her, though her time was drawing near, Frida Kahlo would live on in the colors she had painted, the emotions she had captured, the lives she had touched. She had turned her pain into something beautiful, something eternal. And as the night came to an end, as the flowers in her hair began to wilt, Frida Kahlo lay back in her bed, a smile still on her lips, victorious. Chapter 11. Death, but not the end. July 13th, 1954. Frida Kahlo's heart, that fierce, defiant heart, finally beat for the last time. She had fought through pain, through betrayal, through every obstacle life had thrown at her. But now her body could fight no more. The house fell silent. The colors that had surrounded her all her life seemed to fade, the air heavy with grief. Diego Rivera, the man who had been the cause of so much love and so much heartbreak, stood beside her lifeless body, shattered. Frida was gone. But for Frida, death wasn't the end. How could it be? She had lived so vividly, so loudly. Even in the stillness of death, her presence was too great to be silenced. As the news of her passing spread, waves of sorrow washed over the world. Yet even in that grief, there was something else, something eternal. Frida had left behind more than just memories. She had left her art, her spirit, her legacy. Her body was laid in a simple casket, surrounded by the things she loved, flowers, vibrant, full of life. Friends and admirers gathered to pay their respects, tears flowing freely, but mixed with awe. Frida had lived a life unlike any other. A life that, despite all the pain, had been filled with passion, beauty, and an unbreakable will. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return," she had written just days before her death. It was as though she knew the end was near. But Frida had no fear. She had lived each day as if it were her last, had painted every piece as if it were the final one. And now, as her body was prepared for its final rest, her soul began to live on in ways she might never have imagined. The streets of Mexico City were filled with whispers of her name. Frida Kahlo, the woman who had turned suffering into art, who had shown the world that even the deepest pain could become something beautiful. People from all walks of life, from all corners of the globe, began to realize the magnitude of what she had left behind. Her paintings, once just the expression of a broken body and a defiant soul, were now regarded as treasures. Windows into a life lived with every ounce of emotion possible. Diego Rivera, her Diego, was inconsolable. The man who had been her greatest love and her greatest torment felt the weight of her absence in every corner of their home. La Casa Azul, once filled with laughter, arguments, music, and life, now felt empty. Every wall, every object, every stroke of paint seemed to whisper Frida's name. He couldn't bear it. His grief was overwhelming. "The day Frida died was the most tragic day of my life," he would later write. "I realized too late that the most wonderful part of my life had been my love for her." In the days that followed her passing, the world began to see Frida not just as a painter, but as a symbol of resistance, of survival, of strength. Her self-portraits, those haunting images of herself staring boldly into the world, began to speak to people in ways they hadn't before. Her art had always been personal, yes, but now it became universal. People saw in Frida's paintings their own pain, their own struggles, and their own will to endure. One painting in particular, the two Fridas, seemed to resonate deeply after her death. The image of Frida, split in two, one heart bleeding, the other holding a portrait of Diego, spoke of her internal battle, the duality of her life, the love and the pain, the strength and the vulnerability. It was a painting of a woman who had lived on the edge of both despair and joy, of a woman who had loved fiercely and suffered just as fiercely. And so Frida's legacy began to grow. Exhibitions of her work were held all over the world, from Mexico to New York to Paris. Critics hailed her as one of the most important artists of the 20th century. But for many, Frida was more than just a great artist. She was an icon of feminism, of resilience, of individuality. Women saw in her a figure who had refused to be defined by her gender, by her body, by society's expectations. She had carved out a space for herself, and in doing so had shown others how to do the same. In the years that followed her death, Frida became a cultural phenomenon. Her face, with those bold brows and defiant stare, became a symbol of empowerment. Her image appeared on posters, on T-shirts, in books, in murals. The world couldn't get enough of Frida Kahlo. She was everywhere. But behind the fame, behind the commercialization of her image, was the real Frida, the woman who had endured so much, but who had never lost her fire. Diego, too, played a role in ensuring her legacy. Though their relationship had been tumultuous, though they had caused each other so much pain, Diego loved Frida more than words could express. In the years after her death, he worked tirelessly to preserve her memory, to make sure that the world understood just how extraordinary she was. He transformed La Casa Azul into a museum, filling it with her paintings, her letters, her sketches, her life. Visitors from around the world came to walk through the rooms where Frida had lived, to see the place where her spirit had soared, despite the limitations of her body. And so, even in death, Frida continued to inspire. Her art, it transcended the limits of time, of culture, of language. It spoke of pain, yes, but also of hope. It spoke of a woman who had refused to be broken, who had turned every hardship into something powerful. Through her paintings, Frida whispered to the world, "I have survived, and so can you." Her death, though tragic, was not an end. It was the beginning of her immortality. Today, Frida Kahlo is remembered not just for her art, but for her spirit. She is a beacon for those who struggle, for those who feel different, for those who endure pain, yet refuse to give up. She lives on in every brushstroke, in every bold color, in every story of survival. And so, even as her body rests, her spirit dances in the light of her own legacy, endless, eternal, and free. Chapter 12. Frida's Legacy, the Phoenix of Mexico. Frida Kahlo. Her name, now legendary, echoes through the halls of history. A woman who endured the kind of pain that would crush most, but instead of breaking, she rose, again and again. Like a phoenix, born from the flames of her suffering, Frida became a symbol of resilience, of passion, of life itself. Even now, decades after her death, her story continues to captivate the world. Her journey was one of constant transformation, body, mind, and spirit. Frida didn't simply exist in the world. She fought her way through it, turning each struggle, each heartbreak, into something beautiful, something eternal. And it was this transformation, this ability to rise from the ashes of her pain, that made her immortal. But what is it about Frida Kahlo that continues to resonate, that continues to inspire? It is not just her art, though that alone is enough to secure her place in the pantheon of great artists. No, It is something deeper. Frida was fearless in her vulnerability, unafraid to show the world her scars, her wounds, her broken heart. She took the darkest parts of herself and laid them bare for all to see, not as a cry for pity, but as a declaration. I am here. I have suffered, but I am still alive. And that is what made her extraordinary. After her death, La Casa Azul, the blue house where Frida was born and where she took her last breath, became a shrine. Visitors from all over the world flocked to see the place where Frida's spirit still lingered, where her brushes, her paints, her bed, all frozen in time, remained as a testament to the life she had lived. The house became a museum, a tribute to her legacy, filled with her paintings, her personal belongings, the very heart of who she was. Walking through the house, it's easy to feel her presence, as if Frida might walk in at any moment, laughing, teasing, her hair adorned with flowers. Each room tells a story of her childhood, of her marriage to Diego, of the countless hours spent painting, pouring her soul onto the canvas. Her life, like her art, is there for all to see, vibrant, messy, alive. But Frida's influence didn't stop at the doors of La Casa Azul. It spread across borders, across time. She became more than just a painter. She became an icon. For women, for artists, for anyone who has ever felt trapped in their own skin, Frida is a beacon of hope, a reminder that beauty can come from the darkest places. Her boldness, her unapologetic existence, gave others the courage to be themselves, to embrace their flaws, to fight for their place in the world. In the 1970s, as the feminist movement gained momentum, Frida was rediscovered as a symbol of empowerment. Her self-portraits, once seen as mere reflections of a personal struggle, became powerful statements of identity, of defiance. Women saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who had refused to conform, who had lived on her own terms despite the physical and emotional chains that tried to bind her. And it wasn't just her defiance that resonated, it was her authenticity. In a world that often forces us to hide our true selves, Frida was unapologetically raw. She didn't hide her pain, her imperfections, her differences. She painted them proudly. Her unibrow, her mustache, symbols of her rejection of conventional beauty standards, became part of her identity. Not something to be erased, but something to be celebrated. Her image, with those dark, piercing eyes and that unmistakable brow, became a symbol of strength, of resilience, of power. She appeared on T-shirts, posters, in murals across the world. Her face, immortalized, became the face of a movement, of women reclaiming their power, of marginalized voices demanding to be heard. But while Frida's fame grew, her art remained at the heart of it all. Each painting, each self-portrait, a piece of her soul, capturing the complexities of the human experience. Love, pain, joy, sorrow, it's all there, woven into the colors, the shapes, the faces that stare back at you from the canvas. Her art transcends language, culture, time. It speaks directly to the heart. One of her most famous works, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, continues to capture the world's attention. In it, Frida gazes straight ahead, calm, strong, with a necklace of thorns digging into her neck. A dead hummingbird hangs from the necklace, while butterflies hover around her head, symbols of transformation, of death and rebirth. It is a painting that encapsulates her journey, her pain, but also her resilience. It is Frida, in all her strength and fragility. And then there's the two Fridas, that haunting image of Frida split in two, one heart exposed and bleeding, the other whole. It is a painting of duality, of the constant battle between love and loss, between strength and vulnerability. It's a painting that shows us who Frida was, someone who lived in the space between joy and sorrow, someone who embraced both the light and the dark. As the years passed, Frida's legacy only grew. Schools were named after her, documentaries were made, books written, all telling the story of the woman who had transformed her suffering into art. She became a symbol, not just for Mexico, but for the world. A reminder that the human spirit, no matter how broken, can rise again. In her final years, as her health declined, Frida once said, "Feet, what do I need them for, if I have wings to fly?" And fly she did. Even in death, Frida Kahlo soared. Her art, her life, her legacy continuing to inspire millions. Frida Kahlo, the woman who refused to be defeated, who painted her pain, her love, her truth. She was more than just an artist. She was a force of nature, a warrior, a phoenix who rose from the ashes of her suffering and gave the world something extraordinary. Her legacy lives on, in every brushstroke, in every bold color, in every heart that beats a little stronger because of her story. Frida Kahlo will never be forgotten.